My name is Stephen Barson. I'm one of the composers of Star Wars Jedi Survivor. And today we are going to be talking to some of the people who were involved in making the score and the people who were integral to the sound of the soundtrack and how great it sounds. So we're honored to be joined by Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown is a violinist and also a session producer and a person who records on both sides of the glass with his company High and Low Music. Charlie, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So it's really only been a few decades that orchestral scores have been commonplace for video games. Do you remember any early scores where you were on where you realized, or any moments where you realized that game scores were going to be a thing alongside film and TV?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what I was actually on, I didn't do so many games at the beginning of my session career, but I do remember playing Elder Scrolls Skyrim, hearing the music for that and thinking it was like an amazing orchestral suite. It added so much. There were so many different themes. They interlocked beautifully. And in fact, it was a Respawn game coming to do Titanfall 2, which game I very much enjoyed, even though I'm not really into shooters. The music for that was sensational. We spent quite a few days on it. I think we recorded it here in one. And it was thematically brilliant. And you could just see that it was going to get to that point. And sure enough, when we did God of War, the remake of God of War for PlayStation, the music for that was just epic. It went on for days and days, huge orchestra. And yeah, quite frequently now we have film projects that last 2, 3 days, 4 days maybe, and we're talking 7 or 8 hour days. The games, they can keep coming back and back. There's an upcoming one that we worked on at Air, I think last year. I think we must have done 15, 16 days in total for it. All original music, all absolutely brilliant, and a real pleasure to do.
So what was your first gaming experience? Because you're someone who's worked on soundtracks for games, but also you play them as well. So what were the first consoles you played with, or the first games you remember playing?
I was born in 1980, so the two things I remember, I had a Commodore C16 plus 4,
Excellent.
Which meant it had the 16 kilobytes of RAM, that's kilobytes, plus an extra 4, so it could load some additional colours. And I played a game called Fire Ant on that, which was fiendish, like a maze puzzle thing. Also, I grew up by the seaside, and my dad used to take me to the arcades, and I would play Star Wars Return of the Jedi in the arcade machine, which was fiendishly hard. Never got past the first couple of levels. I was like 4 or 5, but he'd still feed 20p's into the slot back when an arcade cost 20 pence. So that was definitely something I really loved. And then as I got older, I persuaded my parents to buy me a PC, ostensibly for homework and research. And I probably played a lot of Doom on it and a lot of Command and Conquer in the 90s. Then later on, bought myself a console. Once took 3 days off work to play Mass Effect 2. I don't think I'd ever be able to do that again. 72 hours straight playing Mass Effect 2 nearly killed me. It was absolutely brilliant. But yeah, I've always kept it up. My daughter now, she's 13. She also loves the video games, and recently played one, I think probably for the first time, with my wife, who had no interest, with whom I run the business. But partly research, she says, but she really enjoyed it. So I don't think it was all of that.
So are you the kind of gamer that likes to complete everything, or are you someone who speedruns things, or what's your style?
I wish I had the skill to speedrun, but I don't. I don't have as much time to play now because of work and because of family commitments, but I do like throwing myself into the world. I love the escapism of it. I love the submersion of it. And yeah, I just want to find everything that there is. I will spend 100 hours in a game if I possibly can, and want to see all the side stuff, want all the dialogue options, want to pick up the story is very important to me as well. So yeah, I am definitely much more of a completionist than a speedrunner.
You're someone who sits on both sides of the glass. You play violin on scores, but you also work actively as a producer for High and Low Music, your company. Does your knowledge of producing and music technology, does that change what you're doing when you're sitting as a player, and vice versa?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the first, I think, when I started the studio, it was I came from a place where I'd done some music tech at university. I really enjoyed it. I remember we had obviously quite an early version of Pro Tools there on some of the colourful iMacs, and I really enjoyed that. But I hadn't kept it up. I'd obviously started working as a session musician for quite a long time. And I sort of immersed myself into the music tech world and basically cribbed as much information as I could from people here at Abbey Road, lots of lovely engineers, assistant engineers, people giving me some fantastic advice. And if there's one thing it really gave me was a renewed appreciation for every part of the team. The sound that I make when I'm playing the violin, when it's coming out dry into a microphone, bears no resemblance to what it's going to end up like. And it takes the skill of all these people, the engineers, the producers, to really make it something special. And so, yeah, it's exactly the same, I think, when I'm working on something. If I'm recording a score or we're recording an album, yeah, I have a different perspective on how I'm going to approach it. Obviously, when I'm engineering myself, I fall into all the same traps, which is why I get my wife to do it, because she runs the company with me. And also, she's my fiercest critic. She'll let me know if something's not sounding good enough. But yeah, it has changed vastly how I approach even the way I play the violin in the studio. In terms of the sound production, I like to try and imagine what the composer is going for, what emotion they want, whether they don't want that much emotion. And you think about that in terms of how the sound's going to end up once it's been mixed and mastered.
So most composers who come here at Abbey Road think they come here a lot, but as a session musician, you come here way more than we do. What does Abbey Road mean to you?
Well, I remember still coming here for the first time. I think I was 24 and we're doing an Andrew Lloyd Webber session. And yeah, I was completely wowed by it. It's Abbey Road. You know, the history of it is so important. All the people that have recorded here and been part of its history, people like the Beatles, obviously, Thomas Beecham, Paul Robeson. And one of their first records that came out was Paul Robeson. So huge element of history. And if you've forgotten that, you've got all the tourists outside taking photographs or holding up the traffic on the crossing. So it's really marvellous. Obviously, nearly 20 years later, and I've been here a lot, it's still magical to be here. You kind of forget that, though. But what is important is the symbiosis we have with the place. Without Studio One, we wouldn't be able to do as many of the large orchestral projects that are the lifeblood of our industry. And also just the staff, without the wonderful engineers, everyone working behind the scenes, we'd be out in the streets. We just wouldn't be recording. So it is vital to us. Also, they do a really good breakfast. And I understand there might be a bar here as well.
I think people in our industry might not fully understand that when you come in the morning for a session, that you're sight reading everything you see. You've never seen the music before. So is sight reading something you really consciously practiced, or how do you approach sight reading? Because it's usually something that terrifies most musicians.
Yeah, if you told me that this is what I would end up doing for a career, I would have laughed, because no, I didn't start the violin till late, and I was a pretty abysmal sight reader as far as the examinations were concerned. They set a piece in front of you, and it's just pure terror. I think the thing that firstly changed it before I started working was when I was doing my postgrad, and I had a wonderful violin professor, but I was working pretty much full time by that point, and I had no time to practice the repertoire that he was giving me. So I'd sort of go into my lesson at whatever time in the morning, and he'd say, "Oh, how did you get on?" I was like, "I'm really sorry, Professor, I've not practiced." And he was like, "This is great, we're going to sight read it." Now, when it's something like Bartók's Second Violin Concerto, it's not eminently sight readable, but he'd make me do it anyway. So that was very good. You do learn a tremendous amount on the job as well. And back in the day here, it's absolutely fierce sound. People would not be averse to turning around and telling you if you had held on too long or not observed a line or a dot where a line and a dot were quite clearly printed. So you get better. And you start devising sort of plans in your head for how to approach things before you even play them. So definitely working on the job is something that helps a great deal. And practicing it, I think you can do it if you're rigorous about it. I was not a particularly rigorous student.
So a lot of the advice that's given to young musicians today perhaps reflects an industry that's sort of kind of maybe an industry of the past. But what would be your advice to young musicians who want to get into this world?
I think there's two things, although you can't really. I think how much control you have over where you go in a career is a bit of a myth. I think you do have to let the journey take you somewhat. But there's two main things that I think, having had some conservatoire training and then going to university and in fact giving up for 2 years, it's very interesting to sort of put it all together and to see things as sort of someone who had a more circuitous route through the education system with music. One thing is that versatility is a commodity that's not taught but is valued incredibly highly. Conservatoires, they want you to learn your repertoire, they want you to have your technique drilled, but they don't encourage you to explore other avenues of music. I think if you're learning a classical instrument, violin, cello, viola, God forbid, any of those things, you have to open your mind to everything else. You have to listen to as much music as humanly possible. You have to play as much music in different styles. I mean, I studied classically because, like I say, I'm a violinist, but I'm a huge folkie. I also love rap, like old school hip hop, huge fan. Metal, which my daughter also loves, and we spend a great time listening to. I love hearing new bands still. That definitely keeps me versatile, and I think younger musicians really need to do that. I think also the music tech side of it is deeply important. I think something that the pop industry has stolen a march on is that every young aspirant singer-songwriter, they already know how to home produce their stuff. They know their way around Pro Tools or Logic or the DAW of their choice. They know the gear. And classical musicians, I think, have fallen back on that. Having that knowledge is very, very useful. The other thing I think is the competitive thing. Everyone talks about how competitive it is as an industry, but actually you're not in charge of that competition. The only person you can effectively compete against is yourself. And you need your colleagues and that bond of trust to be able to remain open enough to communicate when you're playing in a big ensemble. And our sense of self-worth is always predicated on what work you're doing, what work you've been offered. Why is that person doing that and I'm not? You have to stop thinking like that. You have to understand that we need to be supportive of each other in order to progress and to make the best possible music.
Charlie, thank you very much indeed for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.